Hi everyone, welcome to Best Recipes with Sharon. This recipe today is a well-liked American cuisine. And this is called Southern Fried Chicken Tenders, KFC style. And they are so tasty and tender at the same time. You can serve it with fries, or if you want to give it a little bit of a healthier twist, add some vegetables. But who doesn't like fried chicken? So let's go ahead and make this. Stay with me and I'll show you how it's done. Start with 4 large or 6 small chicken breasts and place them in a Ziploc bag and then pound them a little bit with a meat tenderizer. Then you add 1 cup of buttermilk. This will make the meat tender and the chicken tenders moist. The buttermilk will also boost the flavor and it helps the first coat of seasoned flour to stick better. So I zip it up and then I swish it back and forth so that it coats all of the chicken evenly. And this needs to marinate for at least 30 minutes or a little bit longer if you can, because this is key to making the best fried chicken. Then I take and pour the meat into a bowl, buttermilk and all, and I add 1 teaspoon of hot sauce. And make sure this is mixed in really well and let the chicken sit in that for a little while longer while we mix up the flour and spices. This will make for a really tender chicken. So the spices that you use in this are pretty straightforward and usually stuff that you would have around the house. Start with a medium-sized bowl and add 2 cups of all-purpose flour and just a little bit of baking powder, about 1/8 of a teaspoon. Then add 1/4 of a teaspoon of garlic powder. One teaspoon of black pepper. 2½ teaspoons of salt. Then take a large spoon and mix this all together till it's well combined. Now in a separate bowl, break open 2 eggs and beat them well. Next, cut and place some parchment paper on a cookie sheet. Then remove the chicken from the marinade, place it on a cutting board and cut it into larger strips. And it's good to use a cutting board that has a little bit of a trench around the outside so that it will catch that excess buttermilk that comes off of it. Now then we'll prepare to dredge the chicken. Dip the marinated chicken tenders in the flour and spice mixture, and then in the bowl with the eggs, and once again into the flour and spice mixture. And then placing the tenders on a baking sheet that's covered with the parchment paper. And then do this with each of the chicken tenders. And I've tried it using a fork, but I always end up having to get my hands in there, and it is a bit of a dirty proposition, but it works best doing it that way, I find. And just wash your hands well before you start, and you'll be washing it a few times in between as well. And I find this recipe does this amount of chicken quite nicely for the flour and spices, but 2 eggs is not enough. So I added another 2 eggs to the bowl and beat them up well and just continued on. And I found that I ran out of the eggs about halfway through the actual dredging process. Now you'll take and fry these in hot canola oil. It needs to be about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's to start with, and your oil will vary in its temperature up and down a little bit, but it needs to stay as close to 350 as you can keep it. And because we're frying raw meat, it's important that it stays in the oil for at least 5 to 7 minutes. You want to make sure that it's cooked through properly. So I kept it in for probably between 6 to 7 minutes. So you really need to have a thermometer and you need to have a timer. It's also a good idea to only do it in small batches, 1 or 2 pieces at a time, especially when you're using a small pot of oil like this. And when you're doing it on top of the stove, it does create a little bit of a mess of your stove, but it does clean up easily. You just have to watch that your oil doesn't spit over onto the stove and cause a little bit of a fire. So it does have its pros and cons. You could use a deep fryer, but you'd be tempted to put too many pieces in at once, so you'd have to be careful, because the more pieces you fry at once, the more it lowers the temperature of your oil. And it would be very important to keep your temperature up, just so that your chicken will cook through properly, but it will also crisp up nicely. So each time you place your chicken tenders in the heated oil, you fry them until they're golden brown, and at least 6 or 7 minutes. And I used the tongs to place them in and out of the oil. So this really does require your undivided attention. Once you start frying, stay right with it until you're done. But look at this. It is so worth it. This is definitely Southern Fried Chicken, KFC style, very tender inside, crispy on the outside with some nice spices to accentuate it, and it's a recipe that's a must-have. It's nice and crispy on the outside and moist and tender on the inside, and loaded with lots of flavor. And get out your favorite dip. In this case, it's honey for me. So I'm just going to cut this open and show you what it looks like on the inside. Well, here it is. Perfectly cooked. Nice and white meat and tender. Thank you for watching today's episode, and until next time, happy eating.